Welcome. Good crowd this morning, or actually this afternoon now. Welcome to episode 2 of our 5-part webinar series, the ABCs of returning safely to work. Just going to wait a couple minutes till everybody gets in here, gets seated. Looks good. Looking good. All right, so we're going to get started this afternoon as we have a lot of content that we want to get over and some Q&A that will be up and open and live after the content has been presented. So we're going to get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Mass MEP webinar series, the ABCs of returning safely to work. This series is presented today by safety trainers, and today obviously is episode 2, who will be your COVID-19 safety and health coordinator. I'm Haley Steele. I'm your the marketing coordinator with Mass MEP, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. We also have behind the scenes with us, Christy Grignan, who is the marketing director, and Matt Healy, who is our information technology manager, both with Mass MEP. And our panelist, who has returned with us again this afternoon, is Darcy Cook. She is the owner of Cook Professional Resources. We know her as the owner also of Safety Trainers, and she is doing the presentation for us this afternoon. So thank you for joining us. As you can see, your mics are muted, but you will be able to engage with us this afternoon. You can see I've already put a poll up, so if you could answer that, that would be great. We also have the chat options. Those of you that I would think by now everybody's pretty familiar with using Zoom. The chat's down on the bottom. You can use the chat option, and then we will have the Q&A. So that is also located on the bottom bar. Some of you may be on the top, but you look for the word chat and the little speech bubble and then the Q&A. You can use the chat option. You can, share with your people that are on with the webinar with this afternoon, your questions, your thoughts and ideas, for you to bounce back things with each other. And then at the end of the webinar content, we will be going through all of the questions you have typed into the Q&A box. So please be sure to add your questions as they come up. Obviously, we will be doing polls that will pop up throughout the webinar. You can see the polls that are up there right now. We will put them on a time limit. And then if we can get them closed and if we're able to, we'll put the results up for everyone to see the results. We do have an hour set aside for the webinar today. We feel that's plenty of time for the content that Darcy has to present to you. And then, as we stated in the initial webinar, these episodes are a much deeper dive into the specifics. And hopefully the majority of you watched the press conference this morning, so you will be able to really understand and see the directions of what Darcy is going to be presenting to you this afternoon. So we have set aside a half an hour for content for Darcy to present, and then we'll do Q&A at the end of the discussion. So to be respectful of your time, if there are any questions that are left that we haven't addressed by the end of the webinar, we will send a response directly to the email that is connected to you that have posted the question in the Q&A box. Upon completion of the webinar, you will receive a notification to complete an evaluation. Mass MEP uses these evaluations to provide data for the trainings, and it also provides us insight for continuous improvement on the training content that's delivered to you by our internal staff and also by our third parties such as safety trainers. In completion of the evaluation, it also provides Darcy with some insights so that she can use for the upcoming episodes. We are recording the webinar today for proprietary and internal training purposes. For some of you that are coming back for the second webinar that were on the first webinar, as I stated in the initial webinar, after completion of this series, which is 5 webinar episodes, we will be making the videos of each available through a private link. Upon completion of the 5 evaluations, you will be provided with that link. We do understand you're very anxious to receive this while the information is still fresh, but we ask for your patience as we have a great response and turnout for these webinars. So it does take time to get this process for us to be able to release the link. But please note that due to the importance of this subject matter, we also recommend that you can reach out to us at Mass MEP to one of your trusted advisors, or you can also reach out to Darcy with Safety Trainers for a one-on-one meetings that she can review the details provided. So I will provide the contact information at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to turn the webinar over to Darcy, and she will be starting with who will be your COVID-19 safety and health coordinator. Let's begin.
All right. Hey, thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming back. So first of all, I should be shouting out to all of you in terms of a big congratulations, a job well done, pat yourself on the back. Because if you listen to the governor today and you've gone on the website and you started to look at what the expectations are, you guys should be what I would consider ahead of the curve. We went really quick last week and I basically outlined a lot of stuff up front, but it gave you something to be thinking about over this weekend. And so we'll slow it down a little bit today. I'm going to talk to you specifically about what the governor was saying today is someone needs to be, or some group needs to be in charge of your COVID-19 control plan. So now they've given you a template, right? So breaking news, right? If you haven't gone to their website, you need to go to their website and you're going to get the template. I haven't downloaded it yet. I've been really tight in my schedule today. I haven't downloaded it yet. I'm going to look at it and see what it gives you as a guide. There's a checklist there. See what it gives you as a guide. If it's too general, again, come back to these webinars because hopefully I'm going to drill it down to you and get a little bit more specific. The other piece of information that I want to know you is on May 12th, while we were all enjoying the weekend, the CDC and OSHA teamed up together and they put out new guidelines for manufacturing. So if you're on here, you're probably a manufacturer. I would tell you that I love what I read. And what's great about it is we've already been talking about this, but they've actually put it in more writing and more detail. So you don't have to just believe me anymore. It's an easy one-stop location. I remember how we said we've been navigating and talking to everyone to figure it out. CDC and OSHA teamed up May 12th. If you go to the OSHA.gov website, you will be able to find the new release on CDC and OSHA's guidelines for manufacturing. I encourage you today, if you're on this webinar, then that means you're part of the team that's going to be managing your COVID control plan. I call it safety site plan. So you should have someone go read that, start to draw information from there to help you make decisions and put details. And then of course, someone needs to be going to mass.gov/reopening and reading what is required and expected of the manufacturing industry. For this purposes of this webinar, underneath definitions, I changed my terminology a little bit so that you understand that we're assessing risk and exposure. So we're looking at the hazard. The hazard in this conversation is COVID-19. The changes that you need to make in your business related to the new hazard in your building, the new hazard exposed to your employees, and that is the risk of them catching COVID-19 during this pandemic. So new definition, new focus. Hazard is COVID-19. As I mentioned before, I just want you to know that all of the information I'm giving to you, I pull off of all of the websites and that I read and information that I get from these credible sources. As you should be only taking information from credible sources, the ones that are leading the way in terms of what we should be doing, as well as your trade associations, which I think your trade associations are going to be very important for you as the coordinator moving forward. How do I spend my day? The first part of my day, I get up and I literally go to all of these websites. That's how I found out on May 12th, there was a new release. I read it all this morning to get myself up to speed. The COVID coordinator, whoever's going to take that point position, the number one thing you're going to be doing is reading. and paying attention and scheduling it out so that you're listening to the governor when he's doing his press conferences. You're going to put go into, Google search engine, put in your keywords, so that every time something OSHA's posting, CDC's posting, you can scroll through the new content from the night before really quickly, look at it, click on it, and get a quick overview of what it is that they're talking about. What are the changes? What's the support? What's the resources? What's the advice that you're getting? That is probably going to be the most important role of the COVID-19 coordinator or the lead of the task force, is someone's got to be doing the reading every single day and then organizing that information to give it to your team to make the decisions to move forward. I'm not deviating. So what I've heard today and what I've seen on the websites, I am not deviating from OSHA as being the template, especially since the CDC and OSHA teamed up together and released that information on May 12th. That gives me a clear indication. So just remember, we don't have a lot of laws written yet really dictating black and white what's happening. We have a lot of recommendations and a lot of guidelines that we're working from. But OSHA is a law. And I believe that if the CDC and OSHA start teaming up together and they start making recommendations, we can expect that these are the changes and the future regulations and the future laws that are going to come down and the requirements that are going to be put on industry. So I would just encourage you to continue to recognize that this is dynamic. This is not static. And we have yet to see, we don't know what the future is going to hold on all of these segments that we're talking about in terms of COVID-19 responsibilities. Now, you were, again, given that template, but that template is going to change over and over again, because for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, the recommendations, the rules, the enforcement, you heard Karen Polito talked today about enforcement, and that the likelihood of you getting a citation or in trouble, which is not the intent. The intent is not for the Department of Labor or the Department of Public Health to come and give you citations. It's about getting you on board and making sure that you're following the guidelines or getting you the help and resources that you need. But that's going to be complaints. Those complaints are going to be fielded by customers, patrons, vendors, and guests, or from your employees. And so how enforcement is going to be showing up is repetitive calls from employees, vendors, or visitors or guests indicating that you haven't put a foundation in place. And as far as OSHA is concerned, they're calling it a good faith effort. So if you've gone to the website and you've come to these webinars and you started putting some of this paper in place and you're updating your OSHA standards, so you should be pulling all of these out. COVID coordinator, see these 2 pages? These are the list of standards. These are the lists of standards. So ready? Snap a picture of this page. Snap a picture of this page. You need to be pulling out those if you already have them in the workplace and making your modifications and edits to them. That shows good faith. A revision date, a new revision date at the bottom of all of your policies. A revision date on your new COVID-19 plan, the control plan that you're going to download today and start filling out. Put a date on it, today's date. Now, every time you change it, every time you edit it, to show good faith that you're paying attention, you need to put a new date on it. That is the paper trail. More than ever, you guys are going to be doing a lot more paper because, again, we don't know what the future holds in terms of requirements for paper or regulations, sadly, litigation. We don't know how this is all going to unveil itself in time. But for today, you guys are ahead of the schedule. And again, you're doing a great job. Use these as your foundation for building your COVID plan. So I'm the coordinator, you're the coordinator, and you've already made some decisions. You've already decided that you're going to be on this webinar. So how are you getting information and who are you getting it from, your trusted resources? You have to build that into your daily routine right now. This isn't a weekly thing. Daily things are still challenging. Number 2, you have some version of a sick protocol in place about people staying home, about when they should come to work, when they should return to work. You've put something like that in place, or you're in the process of fine-tuning that. Supply chain. How are you getting cleaning and disinfecting? How are you getting personal protective pieces of equipment? You should have already built a relationship, or you should be getting a relationship. You're going to see that in a poll coming up. We're going to talk about a little bit more in PPE. You need to have a relationship built. Put that on your to-do list. I hope you came to this webinar with a piece of paper, because I'm literally giving it to you exactly the way that you're going to need to do it for your company and business. We're really ahead of the curve, which is awesome. You're going to need to create those partners in the relationships for your supply chain. PPE. Have you chosen your PPE yet? What PPE have you decided for a company? Have you decided on face coverings? Have you decided on masks? You'll see in the information that you're going to be reading today on both of those updated places I told you to look, OSHA.gov and the government, where we're talking about face coverings, and they're asking you to kind of steer away from surgical masks. And how are you choosing your PPE? And also talking about the N95. Ready? Alert. You're hearing it here first. If you haven't read it, you ready? There is mention of N95 masks. Now, I have been from the beginning, no N95, no N95. However, in your job hazard assessments that you on this webinar are going to have to do, I'll spell this out a little bit more as we go on. You're going to have a team of trained people who are doing some kind of assessment and determining whether or not employees should be coming in and out of your building. You're going to be reading about that. Is the recommendations around that. Right now, I have a lot of clients who are just doing the temperature checks in the forehead, right, or in the ear. And those employees, now you have to train those employees in how to do this process, and now you need to give them PPE. The right PPE for the hazard. We're not maintaining 6 feet of social distancing here. I'm within 6 feet, and now I might be the first person to come in contact with an employee coming to work who might have come in contact or might have COVID-19. My risk now just jumped significantly in terms of having to protect against the possibility of COVID-19. This is going to start a new conversation on whether or not we need to be putting gowns, gloves, masks, face shields, and possibly N95 masks on our employees who are doing these assessments before employees enter the building. This is a conversation you as the coordinator are going to start to have to read up on, and we will give you more information as it unfolds. But I told you, if you're going to bring an N95 in, you've got to follow the respiratory standard, which now means medically clearing your employees to wear that, fit testing, a program oversight. There's a whole bunch of new rules that go with that. So put that on we need to really evaluate what the assessment part of our company is going to look like. Disinfecting, you guys should have made some decisions on disinfecting your EPA products, who's doing what, how often. Hand washing, where our stations are, we have to actually train them how to hand wash, the frequency of that. Social distancing is the primary conversation that we've been having. You put some limitations and rules in place. You put changes in your process. Maybe you've pulled some chairs out of your lobby. You rearranged your line, how many times the staff, the employees touch a product, raw material to finish. Maybe you've gone paperless in your administrative offices. And then, of course, your health considerations. This is the pre-screening that I was just talking about with you, and some new changes based on what's been released today that we might need to consider. Okay, you've made your first set of decisions. You've put some things in place. We've got to remember the pulse of it is a 1, 3, or 5. 1 is we don't have it, we're working on it. 3 is, all right, we've got something in place, but we've got to improve it. And 5 is, oh, based on what I read today, based on what I saw, we're rock solid and we're good place. So what's the now what? Here's the now what. The organization of information will still be a challenge for you, but put it as your first role and responsibility as a coordinator. You need to now select your team. So step 2, I'm now the coordinator. What is step 2? Step 2 is I'm choosing my team. Small companies might include the owner, you who's going to be managing it and facilitating it, and then the key person from your HR, plant facilities and operations, and maybe a frontline manager or supervisor in terms of managing your manufacturing facility. Someone might have more than one role. I've seen the HR staff also be the coordinator, so that might be joined together, and then you pull in the head of operations or the plant facilities person with the owner, and that makes up your response team. You need to decide who are the key employees that need to come to the table, because we're going to be talking about the meetings that you need to have and the conversations that you need to have, but you've got to also be looking at the size of your organization and how are you breaking down the information. How quickly is information going to be able to be communicated? What is that line going down? What's the line going back up? How are we being effective and quick? Challenge here is things are moving pretty quickly. So if you're a much larger organization, you might find that you're in the middle, right, with a team of VPs over your head that you need to respond to. But the beauty of it is that you can segment your manufacturing facility into two different groups. You've got your environmental health team over here, and you've got your medical response management, kind of like where I've broken up your emergency action plan and your exposure control plan. If you almost think of it as separating that way. And then who under those umbrellas are going to be managing, evaluating, changing the implementation of the new things that you guys come up with. And of course, don't forget way down here at the bottom, and I should say not the bottom, but to the far right is your front line. Somebody in terms of the disinfecting that's actually doing the cleaning is going to have a say. You're going to need to get feedback between what's working and what's not working, the safety and effectiveness, the resources, the supplies. So you've got to follow your process. If you remember when we talked about you, we told you there are different segments of what you're going to need to be looking at. You're going to need to look at the return to work and the whole visitor vendor kind of piece. You're going to need to look at the disinfecting, trash, bathroom, housekeeping piece. You're going to need to look at the PPE piece. You're going to need to look at how you're reorganizing your facility. That's 4 different departments right there in terms of managing and having meetings talking about these 4 areas. Who is coming to the table? Who is going to be on the phone with you or a webinar with you, giving you feedback so that you guys can make new choices and decisions on what works. The thing about safety is you might agree or decide to implement A. Everyone does A, and then the feedback you're getting back is A just isn't working. So there's where that communication line and having the right people and having frequency of conversations. So you've decided that whoever it is going to get the daily updates every day from all the regulators. Then you've got to choose your team. How are you choosing your team based on how size of your organization and the phases or the parts that you're breaking it down? And then after you choose that, it's going to be the frequency of meetings. So the next slide is going to talk about the frequency of meetings and what are we talking about in those meetings. I'm going to give you examples of manufacturers that we're working with, exactly what they're doing. But see this page? Snap this page, because these are categories. These are areas where you're going to have conversations with the right people. When we do the return to work policy, I'm going to be in the room with the HR person and who else making the decisions on this. When I want to go out and I want to create 6 feet, when I want them to reorganize the direction of which our employees are moving around the building, when I want raw materials placed here and only here, and I want to decrease the number of times it's being touched, how many people are going to be in on that meeting? Who's coming to it? Because we have to create 6-foot social distancing and an operations, a line, a process that's going to serve us too to get our work done. Who's in that meeting? Signage. You got to put a lot of signage up. That signage is going to potentially have to change, increase or decrease. I would strongly suggest that you have some kind of administrative representative along the way who can easily know where they are, put them up, take them down, along with potentially your facilities person and who else you want on that team. Housekeeping. Well, clearly anyone who's doing the disinfecting, whether you have a third party or you've got an in-house team, your facilities person and you need to talk about what areas are we cleaning? How often are we cleaning it? There are new guidelines as of today that have been posted that talk about the frequency and the expectation of disinfecting. Not as clear as I'd like them to be, probably not as clear as you'd like to be, but they give you an indication of where to start. The PPE, someone's got to buy it. So at some point, we got to have a CFO. Someone who's managing the money is going to be in on these conversations. Because even in the engineering controls part, maybe you're ordering plexiglass, maybe you're ordering dividers. In those 2 documents that I shared with you at the beginning of the slide with the CDC and the OSHA recommendations, they're actually talking about the engineering controls and how they want you to look at setting up your lines. No one across from each other anymore, people next to each other, and they've given you some recommendations on how to create spaces. Something really important for you to be looking at. You're going to have a first aid medical team. So what happens when I get sick and I'm not driving, or someone drops me off, or I take a bus to and from work? I can't immediately be escorted out of the building. You have to have a medical team. Is that medical team now putting gowns on and face masks on? Are we limiting and isolating me to a space that then needs to be disinfected after I leave? Are we teaching everyone hands-only CPR? What are in our first aid kits? We have to revamp and look at what is our response to someone who is showing signs and symptoms in our building, if they cannot be immediately removed and escorted out and isolated from the rest of the group. What does that look like within our building? Who's going to be in that meeting? And then finally, training. Everything that we've been talking about, every choice and decision that you make, you will see that you have to actually teach and train your employees how to do this. So you might be the person coordinating it. You might not be the person comfortable standing up and doing all the training. There are a lot of resources you can print that you can actually read from or hand out, especially with the poster compliance that you need to do. Real easy to train from those posters. That's a good place to start. But you have to identify who's going to be doing the training. How often are you going to be doing the training? Remember, training does not require you to pull everyone off the floor for 45 minutes with PowerPoint. I encourage all of you to create safety briefings. Just as fast as this information is happening, before everyone gets on their floor, you're going to be looking at staggering shifts. You're going to be looking at different times on how to, have people in the building. That's one of the recommendations that they're asking you to do in manufacturing. So how often do you need to have a quick little safety briefing with that group before they head out to do their work? Update them, change them, count that as a training, remind them, reinforce anything that's happening and going on in the building. So these already as a coordinator should be a little exhausted. Those three things themselves is a full-time job. I spend hours right now doing it. And so you want to create a system of efficiency around it. I expect it to slow down. I expect it to be more manageable. For those of you who have a foundation in place, this might not feel so overwhelming right now because you've got a foundation in place. Once you all get a foundation in place, you'll feel a lot better about this, because as we're required to make a change, it'll be one change that we can implement across the board. It might be one change that only impacts the department. Maybe it's only related to visitors and guests. Maybe it's related to operations. Maybe it's related to all of the people who are working from home. So it will slow itself down. It will become more manageable as these phases roll themselves out, okay? So here's your first three tasks. 1, 2, 3, responsibilities of the COVID coordinator. I want to give you a little background. So if you're already in this position, then you're in this position for a long time, and you need to know, again, the possibilities. This is a future. I don't have a crystal ball, but here's what I can tell you, is that although we don't have a regulation or a law written by OSHA now, which is the governing federal agency that protects employees in the workplace, a safe and healthy work environment, we do have the Department of Labor, we do have DPH, we do have OSHA, we do have CDC guidelines. And when H1N1 happened, they wrote all of this infectious control stuff up for general industry and not just for healthcare. But it was blocked, and it's literally been sitting around, and it hasn't moved forward in years, right? Since 2017. Bloodborne pathogens is the only standard that we have right now as a guide for general industry other than healthcare, right? OSHA has a directive on how they could find you for TB, and they are using other directives through the standards that I already showed you as the way that they would potentially cite you under COVID-19, but they haven't written a clear directive yet. It will be coming, okay? That directive on how they will cite and find people will happen. The bloodborne pathogen exposure standard will get expanded. I expect that there will be an infectious control standard that will be put out to the general public in addition to your bloodborne pathogen standard, as they have it already. It's just about getting it to move forward. And so they drafted all this, and I read it, and I will tell you, one of the things that I read in there that's a possibility, I'm not saying this is happening, it's a possibility. You as companies and businesses right now are required to offer, not give, but offer to me hepatitis B if I have the risk of coming infected by any potentially infectious material or blood. So other potentially infectious material, blood, saliva, urine, feces. So if I'm cleaning, if I am expected to clean up urine, feces, blood, if I'm on your first aid team, if I'm doing trash, you only have to offer me the hepatitis B vaccination. I'm going to be paying close attention, as you should, if they come a new directive or law that basically tells us now as business owners that we have to offer, right? Offer anything related to COVID-19, what am I looking for? Vaccinations. The word's coming, vaccinations. So I just want to kind of set the tone. We're seeing guidelines and recommendations coming out. We're seeing those as a foundation. I'm expecting that those will turn over to regulations and laws. We already know that we went through a process like this through H1N1. We know that there are some things written and related to infectious control. You can look it up. You can read it yourself. You can kind of futuristic, the ball, start be talking about it with your company. If this happens, how would we do it? How do we manage it? What does our benefits look like? What does the job descriptions look like? This brings up a whole nother HR component, that things that you might need to change around your new hire and, back to work and so on and so forth. So this is just a futuristic crystal ball for you. OSHA, you saw me put this up. They have a guidance on the COVID-19, booklet for you, where I told you that manufacturing is low risk. You are listed as low risk. They have also, right here in this link, I have actually cut and paste. These are the exact words out of, if you are familiar with letters of interpretations or letters that come from OSHA, it's a way for you to understand what they're thinking and what they're going to do and what they expect of you, because they write these laws and you and I read them and we might interpret them differently. And so you can email and call them and they'll give you clarity on it. By the way, right now, if you are taking on the role of COVID-19 coordinator, you should get comfortable with making phone calls to your regional office when you are stuck and you are unsure of what to do, because they will give you the answers. You don't have to tell them the name of your company. You don't have to tell them who you are. What they don't do is they don't give you all the details over the phone, but they actually will give you, citations of where to go, standards of where to go, letters to look up, that actually will kind of support and give you the answers to the questions that you're asking. So I copied and pasted this right out about good faith and what they're doing with enforcement and what they're doing with auditing and what their expectation is. And I will tell you that training and assessment and inspections, even the Lieutenant Governor said it today, you guys are going to be self-monitoring, you're going to be self-patrolling, you're going to be self-policing for right now. But if you want to understand what the code N10-abatement deferred looks like, well, you'll now know when you get a letter or you get a phone call or you get something related to that, what that exactly means when it comes down to OSHA overseeing this. I put into this PowerPoint for you the links to what OSHA is defining as high risk through low risk really quickly. In low risk, if you look in the red that I've highlighted, manufacturing and industrial facility workers that do not have frequent close contact with coworkers, customers, or the public, you are put into the low risk category. So the last sentence is what's important for you as the coordinator. Remember the hierarchy of controls? Go put your engineering controls in place, put all your posted warning signs, that's the one I added, and then go put all your administrative controls, the rules, and training in place for your operation. That puts you in a low risk category. You want to stay in a low risk category because as things are rolled out, the higher you are, the more requirements and expectations that you are going to have on your organization. So that's what the templates are so important that the governor, task force put up for you, is to give you the foundation of, if you're doing these things, it's going to keep your risk down, keep your exposure down. And as they roll out things, you might have to not do as much as someone else who isn't doing it. Medium risk is your traveling, your international travel. So those companies, manufacturers who have employees who travel from state to state or do international travel, you put those employees into a different category. The expectations around what you need to do and how you need to do it will be a little bit stricter. And as those guidelines and rules are revealed, there are some listed now and they become a little bit more clear. We will update you on what that looks like. High risk exposure, of course, our health cares, our funerals, and our medical transport. And the highest risk are what our treating doctors, dentists, paramedics, morgues, where they are actually working directly with positive COVID-19 patients. So your responsibility, every day you're walking into your building with a new pair of safety glasses on. As the coordinator, your job is to constantly be looking at and evaluating all these processes that you've put in place and observing how it is or isn't working in your building. Job hazard assessment has been cited over and over again in everything that I've been reading, even in the May 12th CDC and OSHA together guidelines. They are talking about job hazard assessment. They are expecting you to really focus on reorganizing your building for social distancing and what and how you're doing it. So as I shared with you last week, this is what the hierarchy of controls looks like. This is what you need to be good at. Every time you're looking at something that someone is doing and the way that they're doing it, as the coordinator, you need to run through these upside down triangle and figure out, is there a safer, better way to do it? Is it working? Is it not working? Then you're going to make changes and document what those changes are. This is all about prevention here, you guys. It's 100% about prevention. Sometimes safety operates on being reactive. Someone gets hurt, something happens, we write an incident report, we respond to that incident. Everything that I'm reading and seeing is about all of the work that you have to do up front and in the beginning to make sure that we decrease the risk of any of this happening altogether. So this hierarchy of controls, OSHA.gov has a whole segment where you can self-teach yourself and learn about this. This is also a great place to get support and counseling and resources internally and externally. You know, bring these open-ended questions to your team about how can we make it better. You want to be interviewing your employees. They are going to come up with some great ideas because they're actually doing the work, and more eyes on it. It's different perspectives. My background, your experience, my experience, it's different. Some of the best solutions to health and safety that I've heard over my 20 years have come from the employees who are actually doing the work every day. No one ever asked them, so therefore they never shared. And once they shared it, it was brilliant. It was the solution that we've been looking for. And when you can get a really good solution, it saves time, money, effort, energy, and resources. So don't hesitate to ask the people doing the work in short little surveys, you know, if they have recommendations for what this could look like. That is also built into what we're seeing and hearing of the recommendations coming across the board. So engineering controls, I've just given you this as the categories. These are bulleted out. You need to do engineering controls in all of these categories, and you guys need to do administrative controls in these categories. You might want to snap the picture. Here, you're going to need to look at those two plans I told you, emergency response and exposure control. And again, what are the engineering controls you put in place under those two standards, OSHA standards, and what are the administrative controls that you're putting in place under those two standards? I think you've heard this enough. Here's a list of bulleted point examples. This is nothing earth-shattering. There's nothing here that's gonna rock your world. You can read about these bullets on social distancing. They've been repeated over and over again on every single website. As the coordinator, what you have to understand that the decisions and choices you're making are to create distance and exposure, right? So keeping surfaces clean, using the PPE to keep them clean, not sharing, staggering people's exposure in a space, limiting numbers of people. It's all about really the social distancing model. So you guys did these three in the beginning. So you're going to every day be looking at the new data and present it to your team. You got to build your team. You got to figure out what your meeting schedule is going to look like. In your meeting schedule, I will tell you, this is how a lot of my companies are doing it. Every morning, they all get on a phone call and they talk about anything that's happened in the last 24 hours. Their number one focus is, has anyone called in and said that they've been exposed to COVID-19 or have COVID-19? That is what the morning phone call is about. They just triage and manage anyone who might have been in the building yesterday, who now called in today, who said they had COVID. And the whole focus of the morning team is just to go do the contact tracing, cleaning and disinfecting, and make any changes to their function that they need. That's the first phone call. The second phone call of the day typically comes right after lunch, especially if there's been any new announcements by the governor. Everyone gets on the phone and they talk about the new announcements. Do we or don't we need to make changes based on what the information that we just got? And if we do, then we start to assign so that by the end of the day, phone call number 3, these phone calls are happening at 6, 7 o'clock at night, sometimes 7:30. I've seen some of the executive teams getting on calls at 9 o'clock at night, communicating round the clock to be ready for tomorrow. So the last phone call of the day, whatever that looks like, is did we get everything we needed accomplished today? And what do we need to set up for tomorrow? And so 3 times a day, my COVID teams are talking. Beginning of the day, has anyone called in and said that they had it? Let's deal with that. Middle of the day, any new announcement adjustments, let's organize and delegate to make it happen. End of the day, how close did we to get it all done? You need to then add the hazard assessment, engineering controls, and administrative controls to your responsibilities. Those are the key components for you. Posters, I want you guys just to go download everything there is. You're going to see in these 2 things that they talk about. You got to get lots of posters up and then just teach and train from these posters. They're all free and available to you. So on your to-do list today, before today's up, just start downloading posters, figuring out how many copies you need and where you want them posted. These are the requirements. Go ahead and snap a picture of it. You need to have posters. It's written into the documents that in all the language that your team understands. Staying at home, what is the directives around that? Coughing and sneezing etiquette, proper hand washing. You need to put those in the following locations. They need to be at the entrance of where all the doors that people are coming in. You need to have them in common areas where your employees gather, locker rooms, breaks, whatever those might be, and any additional workspaces that make sense for you. But this is in writing, written down as what you need to do. So if the checklist, which I haven't looked at, and says you guys have to do poster compliance, and it doesn't list out the posters that you need and doesn't tell you where to put them, this slide does. It tells you what you need and where to need to put them. You have to have them big enough that they can read from a distance. And then of course you have to put all your social distancing posters, markers, floors, signs, everything all over the place in your redesign. And then last but not least is the training that you might have to provide on these posters. What happens if I can't read? English isn't my first language. Do you have them in multiple languages? What if I need sign language? Whatever the case is you just can't, leave no man behind. Make sure that your training encompasses all of your employees' needs. And then I know we're a little over in time, so give me a minute. I'm going to wrap this up. Record keeping is your requirement. You need to understand and know and or work with the team on what does injury and illness logs look like with OSHA. How are you going to be managing your first aid logs? Do you have sharp log needs? If you do, put those in place. If your company is already doing temperature checks, how are you documenting or how are you tracking that data? Or what are you doing with that data? Are you doing pre-qualifying questions with your employees? Are you doing pre-qualifying questions with your vendors and your visitors and guests? What's the paperwork trail with that? And of course, the word that we're hearing is contact tracing. To me, that's incident investigation. If I find out today that someone tested positive that was at my company today, yesterday, and I go back, I'm now doing an incident investigation and I'm figuring out all the people that they came in contact with, which I should know because I've controlled and limited all of my flow and operations. So I know exactly how many times or how many people Darcy comes in contact in a day and where those things should be happening in terms of our controlling processes. Some of you will have a bigger trouble because you have more people and more spaces, but the idea is to be able to isolate that and bring it down. Here's your PPE responsibilities, coordinators. You guys need to use that PPE. You guys got to find credible supply chain resources. Remember, one size does not fit all, so make sure that you are getting feedback about what you're buying and if it's working or not working. You got to do the training. Again, you might not be you, but someone else within your company is better at it. How to put it on, how to take it off, how to use it, how to disinfect it, how to store it, and how do I get a new one? And signed, posted. Snap a picture of this thing. This is exactly what you need to do. You do not need to go to any other website to figure out what your requirements are for PPE. If you haven't done these trainings and you haven't put this process in place, these 5 bullet points, this is what you need to do. This is what's going to be required of you to get back and up and operating, which is effective today. Manufacturers, if they have everything in place, they can start going and they have a week. If you've already been an essential worker, you have a week to get all this up to speed. Communication, again, newsletters, overhead paging, meetings, training, briefings, and of course, relationship with your IT department. You guys need to have a relationship with your IT department. You need to be talking about, for all of us who are working from home, access security. Do we have the equipment? Do we have the resources? You know, paperless systems, again, the less touching, the better. So this is, again, a reminder to you who's going to be in that communications conversations on your team and how you guys going to put things into place. And this is your last slide of things to do, which is your training. So in your training, you are required, again, you don't have to go to a website. I'm telling you I've read the websites. You must be doing this training. If you don't have this training done, you haven't had your employees sign off on it, then it didn't happen. Signs and symptoms of COVID-19 is an expectation of training. Hand washing, hand sanitizer, practices, expected you train your employees in it. Coughing, sneeze etiquette, yes, it is listed as training that you should be doing or have to do. And putting on and taking off everything related to PPE, you need to be doing for training. So if you haven't done that yet, you don't have to go research it. Just start, get your rosters together, figure out how you're going to get this training done, put this training in place. All right, so now we're going to open up to questions and answers related to some of the structure. Haley, I'm going to give this over to you on the next steps for our coordinator and what they can expect.
All right, sure. So let's go through, first off, before I start the questions, I just want to thank you, Darcy, for doing this for us again today. This wealth of information that you provide for everyone is greatly appreciated. And that to let everybody know that, you know, obviously we're always available for one-on-ones. Just before we start the questions, would you mind sharing the OSHA slide at the wasn't far in, and you had said to everyone, snap a picture of this. Some people weren't
ready
as quickly ready as you are.
So
there we go. That's the slide that everybody wants.
So everyone snap a picture of this slide, and then I'll click it to the next one. This is your shortcut. This is the regulations you want to focus on as first, first and foundation, because it's built into everything that we're reading.
Okay. And then I also, so everybody knows, in the chat, we did put in for the next 3 webinars, the links for you to register for those. And then let's get started. So first question, should employees, so Irene sent this question in, should employees 65 and older come back to work or remain at home?
So this is where your job hazard assessment comes into place, and we have to assume the risk by having them in the workplace. How many changes are you able to make in your operation? Are we able to keep 6 feet for them at all times? Can we stagger the shifts to decrease the number of people? Can we increase the airflow so the air is turning over quickly? Are they safely able to wear a face covering or a shield as a barrier? By the way, face shields now are considered engineering controls and personal protective pieces of equipment. So that's a new thing for you to think about. That's awesome. I read that today. And do they have to? So I guess the first question is, can we eliminate 65 and over? We love you, but we want to keep you safe. So can we eliminate you? If you can work from home, the expectation is they work from home. If they cannot, they need to come in. Then you go down the next one, substitute, engineering, warnings, and administrative controls. So we are going to put in place and create a safer environment for them. What does that look like for you? You'd have to share with me to be able to brainstorm back and forth what you've already done, and are you missing other things that you could be doing? We want to exhaust everything in engineering and everything in administrative controls before we just put PPE on and say, hey, come on back. Are you taking temperature checks? Are we doing the sick policy up front? What does that look like in terms of a whole preventative program, so we make sure that we create a healthiest possible environment? I know I did not give you an exact one thing to do, but what I did tell you is we can bring them back, but we've got to make sure that we've done everything that we can to create a safety and health environment for them.
Okay, so to kind of follow up on that one, Darcy, another question that seems to keep popping up is, so if employees can be more than 6 feet apart, are face masks required?
So right now, under the directive, it doesn't clearly say do not have to wear a face mask. So I've been reading and looking for that, okay? What I'm reading, and it's an interpretation because I've seen nothing that says, but I'm actually going to make a phone call to OSHA. I have an actual list of OSHA questions that I'm going to be making later on this afternoon because everything I read today from the governor and from the OSHA CDC website says they're required, they're mandatory. And then there's this exception. They're required and mandatory. And then there's always this word, but if we're maintaining 6 feet apart. What they haven't clearly come out and said, and I haven't read it anywhere yet, so I'm going to push for clarification, is if we are maintaining 6 feet apart and we have all these other engineering controls in place, do we have to have a face mask on? And the reason I want to know that is for our higher risk COPD, diabetes patients who want to come back, who wearing a mask or face covering might be difficult for 5 hours a day. I wear them when I try to teach a class, and I'm pretty healthy, and I know how hard that is. So what is going to be that substitution? So we will get a clarity of answer for you, and it won't be my interpretation. I will be calling OSHA to get their interpretation, and we will make that available to you if we can get a real answer that clearly says what exactly to do. Your engineering controls decrease the risk, but I, like you, want to know, do we have to have a mask on if we're able to keep 6 feet apart?
Okay, so we're going to stick with the mask right now because we have a couple of questions regarding that. So there's a question from Lori. She's asking, so there seems to be some confusion about which side of the mask touches your face. Is it the blue side or the white side that's supposed to touch your face?
White to you, blue faces out.
Okay. And then how about, will N95 masks require fit testing and a respirator program?
Yes, absolutely. 100%. If you have N95 respirators, these are not face masks or coverings, you will have to follow OSHA's respiratory standard, even if it's a voluntary program.
Okay. So, and then we have, so Becky writes, if someone from the public wants to enter your building and is not wearing a mask or does not have one in their possession, are we, one, required to provide a paper mask to them if we want them to enter? Two, are we allowed to deny them, ask them if they will wear a mask, or do we not have extra if they don't have extra to offer them?
Great question. Okay, so let me kind of break it down into multi-phases. So number one, the regulators, so we're going to talk about it differently. So let's say OSHA, right? They're all about protecting your employees. They really don't care about your visitors and guests, okay? So if you made a rule and that said visitors and guests can't come in our building because you put risk to our employees without them, you don't have to provide them to them. OSHA says you have to provide them to your employees, but you don't have to provide them to your visitors and guests. They say just don't come in. Department of Public Health, right? So your businesses, people have to come in. These new guidelines under the, Governor Baker, is that whether you're in a building or outside a building, right now in Massachusetts, you're supposed to be wearing a mask if you can't maintain 6 feet. So my next question to you is, if I was a visitor and guest and I was coming into your building, can we maintain 6 feet or not? If we can't, then I absolutely have to have some kind of mask. You are not required to offer it to me. You need to have what? Posted signs outside your building and letting everyone know that there's no shirt, no shoes, no service, no mask, no entrance, right? It's a whole kind of new world, but you've got to have those signs posted outside so it gives an indication. And again, you're here to make a safe and healthy environment for your employees and of course your patrons and guests, secondary, right? But in the manufacturing world, it's about your employees. So if you're having your employees wear PPE, then you should definitely be having your visitors and guests wear PPE. You also get to set up your safety policy for visitors and guests. Every company, when I come into the lobby, I read your policy. I either accept it or I don't. Taking pictures, proprietary information, wearing your PPE, bringing in my own PPE. I always bring my own, but it's your sandbox. You get to make the rules. You can't.
And the same would go for office then, right, Darcy? It's the same in an actual office space.
So in an office space, your employees, you are required to provide personal protective pieces of equipment to them and pay for it at no cost to your employees. If your employees are abusing it, forgetting it, not using it, tearing it up, keep asking for more, there are some things where you need to be talking to your HR department about your discipline policy. Because your safety discipline policy, if I'm not compliant over and over and over again, I should be written up. I should get the verbal warning. I should get the written warning. And ultimately, if I'm not playing and following the rules, out I go for termination. Because you're going to have to find a way. Remember self-regulating? Did you hear that word today when the lieutenant governor said self-regulating? OSHA's not plowing down your door. The expectation is that everyone's going to self-police. So that means you have to have some kind of what I would call a written safety policy around discipline for noncompliance.
So in the, falls into that, I think. If employees take their mask home that they are using at work, should they be getting a new one at work each day?
Tell me what your rules are going to be, because right now there is a bit of an exemption that basically says I can wear a surgical mask today and in the manufacturing world. It's not getting soiled. I'm not coughing, sneezing it. It's not sweaty. I work in the front office desk. It's mine. I can put it into a Ziploc bag, leave it at my desk. No one messes with it, right? Or I can contain it, or I can reuse it the next day. You have to set up a policy that says, hey, we give disposable masks. Every day I expect you to throw that out, and every day I expect you to get a new one. Or, because you have to pay for it. Or we're using them, but at this point where it breaks, there's a hole, there's a tear in it, it's soiled, it's wet, it's moist. I have to provide you with a way to replace it, and you have to train you, how do I get that replacement? If you guys are moving from surgical masks to go into cloth masks, same thing's going to apply. I have to have two. I have to wash every other day. You have to set the rules, which is why it's a little hard when you go to OSHA.gov and CDC and the government site right now, because they're not explaining this to you. So you've got to take what they're saying, kind of interpret it, and create what works for you. Remember, 2 McDonald's aren't the same, 2 mechanics aren't the same. Figure out what's your supply chain. What can you afford? What do you have access to? How can you protect your employees safely? And then what is going to be the rules, the process around that?
Yeah, so whether you're in an office alone or you're in there with less than 25%, it's all based off of these rules.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's switch over. I think this is a unique question. I think it's a good one. So Barbara wrote in, may I be a remote employee and be the dedicated coordinator?
Yeah, so right now, there's no rules about you having to be on site. But here's what I'm going to ask you. Remember, I told you on the what's to do for the to-do list. If you're going to be the coordinator, you need to choose a team, a person, a group of persons who can observe what the rules are and how all of these new controls are working in the workplace. So if you're working remotely and we have people at the office, the manufacturing, the facility, you've got to coordinate with a team on the ground who you're coaching, who are looking for things, who are checking on things, who are assessing things and reporting back to you, so that you and the rest of the team, whoever that is, can make decisions on effectiveness. So you can be remote as the coordinator. I'm remote for hundreds of companies. I'm a safety consultant. I am not in their building. They call me up. We have a conversation. I send them to go look, gather, bring it to me. We get on a Zoom, we get on the phone, and we figure it out. So yes, you can be a coordinator and be a coordinator from home, but don't forget your responsibility of having eyes on what's going on and making changes to the process.
So if there are essential manufacturers that are out there that didn't close that are on with us today, and they followed general safety and social distancing, mask, hand washing, etc., do they still need to do the training?
Oh, absolutely. Training cannot be skipped. Right now, I will tell you, your only defense against making sure that, should you get challenged or what's going on, the word training is coming out of everyone's mouth. The governor, the lieutenant governor, CDC's websites, OSHA's websites, your trade associations, everyone's using the word training. And as I said, it can be a 5-minute training, a 10-minute training, it can be a Zoom training, it can be a pre-recorded training. Training just has to be in a language that I understand, in I should say a native tongue or language that I understand, in terminology that's not too big or confusing for me, and it needs to be effective. So I know that's a really loose word, effective. Darcy, what the heck does effective mean? It means after you're done training me, if someone were to ask me questions, I should be able to answer their questions according to what you taught me. That's effective. You all get to decide how you're going to execute training to create effective training. And in some cases, it might have to be repeatedly, done over and over again in small increments.
Okay, so another question on the coordinator. Does it need to be a new person, or can it be the current safety coordinator?
Oh no, I strongly encourage, God bless the current safety coordinator. You already have a ton of things to do, but you should easily be able to sort more so than anyone else in your organization. So absolutely, if you are already involved in safety and you are the lead safety, if you are hired as EH&S, definitely you can take on and be that coordinator role. Strongly encourage it.
All right, so let's get into, do you have any recommendations for how to deal with union policies and or unions in regard to how a COVID-19 plan may supersede labor agreement policies?
Yep. So I wish I had a solid answer for you. That is going to be uncharted new territory that we are all going to have to walk down together. And that's where the work, I taught you guys about communication. That is where communication is going to come into place, clearly. I wish I had a solid answer for you. It's a complicated question. I don't think any one person is going to be able to give you the answer to that. I think it's going to come from a consortium of the people who need to be in the room or on those conversations. Here's what I can tell you. OSHA, CDC, DPH, all of them, they don't care about a union contract.
Yeah.
When it comes to enforcement and citation and regulation, they care about did you do good faith effort and did you follow these guidelines and or laws that they're putting into place? And that's where that whole paper trail or documentation trail is going to be really important to you. Whether the unions like it and accept it or not, completely different conversation. So I apologize for not being able to, I wish I had an answer for that one.
So Darcy, we've kind of gone over in time, but we have 13 more questions. Do you have 10 more minutes that we can answer these questions?
Yeah, let's go through them if we've got them.
Yeah, we've got a good amount of participants that are still on, probably waiting. So next question from Peter. For BBP, is there a size limit for a company to have a BBP training?
So so for BBP, let me help break this down for you. Bloodborne pathogens standard says that if you have employees that potentially could be exposed to blood or other potentially infectious material, you need to follow that standard. Based on me telling you on the first webinar, you all need to have a first aid team. This would apply to you. Okay, so now the bloodborne pathogen standard, the specific question, Haley, is do I what?
Do you, oh, sugar. Sorry, I lost it there. Oh my gosh, I just lost it. Oh, for the BBP, is there a size limit for a company to have?
So the persons who need to participate in the bloodborne pathogens training are only the people who would be exposed to blood or other potentially infectious material. So in this case, it's who's doing trash in your building. Are they employees? Who's cleaning your bathroom? Are they employees? If you're subbing this out to third parties, you should ask those third parties for proof of their training records that they did bloodborne pathogens training with their employees before you bring them onto your site. Your first aid team will have to go through the bloodborne pathogens training, but it's only those that apply. I work in manufacturing, I'm in production. You don't expect me to go clean up vomit, urine, feces, sweat, or other potentially infectious material. If that's not my job, then I don't have to go through the bloodborne pathogens training.
Okay, so kind of to follow up on that, Darcy, Frederick asked, first aid team, are they the same as having people that are certified in adult CPR, first aid, and AED? Can they be the same people? Can it be your first aid team?
That's the best place to start. Take the people who have already volunteered or been voluntold to be in the first aid, CPR, and AED training. So they've already kind of agreed to help in a first aid emergency, right? Manage the first 15 minutes while we wait for an ambulance to arrive and kind of delegate responsibilities. So that team is the best team to start with, as training them now, good hand washing, new PPE concerns, room isolation, sick person, signs and symptoms of COVID-19, hands only CPR. We are not blowing into the mouths of anyone right now. It's hands only CPR. And if you have an AED, get that AED on immediately. So yes, good group to start with underneath that umbrella.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of hit, we're going to get into like underlying conditions and cases. So are positive COVID-19 cases supposed to be recorded on the OSHA 300 log? And what if the employee was already quarantined for 2 weeks due to family exposure prior to showing as positive?
Okay, so 2 parts. Number one is COVID-19 a recordable on the OSHA injury and illness records log? And the answer is Yes. I'm
Okay.
going to put the word but. Yes, but OSHA has literally put out a directive, and you can read it, and we can get that link for you guys, that says, do an incident investigation. Find out, because we also know that Darcy could have gotten this what? At home, not from work. So the first criteria is I had to have caught it at work. It has to be a workplace exposure to COVID-19. And then you're like, well, Darcy, how can I prove that? In the next sentence, it talks about how having more than one person testing positive in your building, on a shift, in a department, would then make it an indication that Darcy probably got it at work. But one case, no one else in my department, no one else, that wouldn't warrant going on your OSHA 300 log, okay? Or your 300, 300A in your recordables. OSHA also said that they right now are really just focused on the healthcare industry, and that they're kind of leaving the rest of us alone when it comes to recording COVID-19. Now, will that change? I don't know yet. We're going to obviously pay attention to what's coming up, but they've kind of, softened their control over that. Also, you said, what if someone's been out for days on quarantine because they had an exposure to their family members? So interesting. Footnotes. I've been reading lots of footnotes on definitions. So in terms of whether or not this should be a recordable. And so I don't have a solid answer for you, but here's what I can tell you. That is also on my list to OSHA, because if I'm the company and you now tell me that you potentially have been exposed and I quarantine you, so you're getting that directive from me to not come to work, and you're missing work because of a potential exposure, which isn't the same as catching it at work, we need a footnote at the bottom of these directives to understand the definition. Just like we had to read the definition of what's prolonged contact, and prolonged contact meaning over 10 minutes. Because if you're less than 10 minutes with someone in terms of contact tracing, that might also not warrant you having to send people home. So these definitions, these interpretations, these letters of clarification, they're a little slow on some of these. They're only responding as you and I have these conversations. So we're like, oh, we really need a clarity on that definition. Just know that that's on our clarity of definition on the quarantine piece.
Okay. So next question. Hand sanitizer and isopropyl is highly flammable. Is there a specific amount of flammables allowed outside a flammable storage cabinet?
There is. So first of all, if you're using it, then you're using it. So you're gonna not love my answer. If you're using it, you're using it. If you're not using it, it's now considered stored. You can't store flammables outside of a flammable cabinet. So what you don't want me to hear, what you don't want me to say to you is, hey, you know that hand sanitizer you have all over the building, right? In quantities, right? If we have, here's what I was saying. You can keep your hand sanitizer on the front desk, in the bathroom, in the wash station, all this kind of stuff, because of the smaller quantities. Where we have clarity is in this. If you have 5 gallons together or more of isopropyl and hand sanitizer stored on a shelf someplace or in a closet someplace, in the NFPA 30, so National Fire Prevention Association writes standards, not laws. They have clear guidelines on, and they have videos and YouTubes and posts that you can Google search right now that they will explain and talk to you what their expectation is. And OSHA would typically point to them as the experts and say, whatever they say goes. But they're basically saying that if you have 5 gallons of stored, that needs to be put into a flammable cabinet. By the way, you need to write rules on smoking and using hand sanitizer. I said to you in the last webinar, or maybe it was in my podcast I did the other day, I had an employee, right, we have employees who don't understand that hand sanitizer is flammable. And if it hasn't dried and they go outside to light a cigarette, they could, obviously ignite that and catch that on fire. So you actually have to put a rule in place. You actually have to have training around that. They need to understand the flammability of isopropyl alcohol and hand sanitizer.
Okay, so back to employees. How do you handle underlying conditions employees? Do they have to tell you they have a condition? And do we require them to return to work?
Yeah, so it's another area. This is where I love my HR people. This is an AIM. If you guys are members of AIM HR Solutions, this is definitely an HR attorney law question. This is where your attorneys are going to come into place because the way I would answer it is I'm looking at it from a hazard, a safety and health hazard. I'm a safety and health hazards person. I'm not an HR law or ADA law and so you're definitely going to need to get their advice on it. To me, so first of all, I come from a healthcare background, so HIPAA tells me I can't ask you about your personal medical backgrounds. You can share it, but I can't ask it, and I can't use it to hire, fire, terminate, blah, blah, blah. From a health and safety perspective, I just look at all of you as high risk, and I have to offer you, right, a solution to the problem. That's why the hierarchy of controls before we put the PPE on is so important. And so if I am an employee who comes to you and says to you, now I have to divulge, I'm not wearing it, or I don't want to wear it. I don't know if you can ask the questions of why or how come. That's not my role. You've got to find that out. If you find out that they're high risk and they're willing to offer that to you, then again, it goes back to what I read today, which was great, is that face shields are now considering an engineering control as well as a PPE. And so although a mask might not be safe for anyone who's high risk, we can now use a face shield with 6 feet, right? Social distancing and an aggressive hand washing process and contact surface cleaning for their spaces. We won't allow them to share spaces. We might have to redesign that because the sharing without disinfecting especially puts that exposure up to those high risk or medically complicated people.
Okay, so we've gone over in what we had extended for, and we actually have a lot of questions that keep coming up. So I'm going to give one more question to you, and then after we answer that, we will end the webinar due to your time, Darcy, and what you have going on. But we will answer these questions, and we will email the people who sent the questions in. So the question we're going to end with today is, what about for very small companies, say less than 10? How do we implement this at that scale?
Okay, so it might feel a little overwhelming, but a less than 10 is a little bit easier because you guys have so much more control than if I've got 100 people running around, right? So the less than 10, so first of all, depending on what your manufacturer is and where OSHA classifies you in terms of having to record injury and illnesses or report, it changes when you have less than 10 employees. I can tell you that emergency action plan doesn't have to be written. It only has to be verbal when you have less than 10 people. So there are some rules that help out those companies that are small, less than 10. But it doesn't exempt you from identifying hazards. It doesn't exempt you from the hierarchy of controls. It doesn't exempt you from making changes in your operation and making rules and posting things and then providing the right PPE to your staff. Yes, this is a cost. A lot of companies that are small to medium size, they might not actually have a line item in the budget for safety. So this might pose some new financial challenges for organizations that don't have, a safety budget. So you aren't exempt because you're small, but what you are able to do is you're probably able to put better controls and rules in place. And you're also going to be able to tell with only 10 people or less, you're going to know where everyone is, and you're going to know whose spaces are, and you're going to know what the flow of traffic is and what direction I move in your building and how many times I'm in a space. You will actually be able to grasp this a little bit quicker. Don't feel overwhelmed. Take the pieces and just set it up for your business. Just make it apply to what your resources are, the number of people you have, and how you function today. What you're doing might be great. You might realize that there are only small modifications that you need to put into place around your operations. If you've got a lot of people sharing a lot of stuff and a lot of people touching stuff, that's where the challenge comes into play for a small business in terms of the amount of disinfecting that you might need to do, or how you might have to change your process. I strongly invite you or encourage you, take advantage of express grants and workforce training grants and get a hold of Mass MEP and look at lean, look at 6S. Like, you're going to need to have someone else with a different set of eyes look at your process and decrease the amount of time people are touching stuff. That's going to be the biggest challenge for a small company, but we've got financial resources and a team of Mass MEP people that can help you with that.
All right. So thank you again, Darcy, for being with us today. We will get the last of these questions answered. There were also some more that came up in the chat. So we will do the same with that, and we'll make sure that we connect with each of you directly. Thank you all for taking the extra time to stay on with us from 2 to 2:15. We appreciate it. Don't forget, we have episode 3, 4, and 5. The links were in the chat, but you can also find them at massmep.org. So thank you, Darcy, and we will see everybody on Wednesday at 1 o'clock.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.